Death is missing. Hola everyone, Andrea here, and I hope you've been having amazing reads as usual. Today we have another book review, and we're going to be talking about Terry Pratchett's The Reaper Man. I hope your reads have been as good as mine lately. I've been on a row of really good books and I can't wait to talk to you about them. But first, again, let's just go with Terry Pratchett's Discworld, and The Reaper Man is the second book of the Death series. If you're curious about it, I have another video where I spoke about the first book in the series, which is this one called Mort, and it's the first in the Death series, but it's not the first in the whole Discworld, and it's a whole universe. If you want more information, go watch that video. But to talk about The Reaper Man, this actually is the 11th book in the Discworld series to be published. It was initially published in 1991, so that was more than 32 years ago, and it was published 4 years after the first one, Mort. This does not mean that Terry Pratchett spent 4 years between this book and, between Mort and Reaper Man. He actually published 6 other novels in between, which is just mind-blowing. Okay, that all his books are on the shorter side, but still, writing 6 books in 4 years is quite commendable. It kinda gives vibes of Brandon Sanderson, no? Unfortunately, Reaper Man wasn't up for any awards at the time. However, this does not detract from its success. With over 98,000 ratings on Goodreads, this book averages on 4.28, and that's quite high for a book on Goodreads. Anything above 4, I would say it's considered a good book, and the higher the 4, the better. The premise of the book is quite simple. I'm gonna read it to you, but it's only 4 sentences, so there's not much that you can be spoiled with. However, I'll still let you decide if you want to get spoiled or not. The timestamp will be floating around for you to decide it, and I hope I've given you enough time. Alright, let's go. Death is missing. Presumed. Gone? Which leads to the kind of chaos you always get when an important public service is withdrawn. Meanwhile, on a little farm, far, far away, a tall, dark stranger is turning out to be really good with a scythe. There's a harvest to be gathered in. See? Super simple premise. I think it still kinda delivers what this book is about, and it gives the flair from Terry Pratchett that everyone knows so well. Now, before I start the actual review of the book, let me just say there might be spoilers for the first book of the series, Mort. However, I will try to avoid any kind of spoilers for The Reaper Man. If anything slips out, I will have warnings letting you know if you want to continue hearing about it or not. And just for reference, I'm going to put up the results for the first book, Mort, and the results I gave for each one of the categories. It was an excellent book. I really loved it. There were some parts that I thought could be better or could be improved, and I hope this was the result in The Reaper Man. Of course, I'm not going to tell you if it was or not right away. You have to watch the video. And then again, if you want to know the reason behind the scores, just look at the card in that corner, I think, and it should show up, and you can just go directly to that video, watch it, and then come back. Alright? But with the housekeeping done, let's jump into the review. We shall start with the usual, which is our plot. The plot of this book is split into 2 plot lines, and none of them has anything to do with the first book. This is almost like a completely different story that happens to have coinciding characters from Mort. In this book we follow again 2 plot lines, one with Bill Door and one with Windle Spoons. I'm not gonna get into detail on who they are because that will be major spoilers, but they are quite different and they play very different roles in this story. And of course, once you read the book, you'll understand the names, because at the moment I bet they sound very, very random. Now, with the very first few pages, I was really interested in the book. The plot was able to grapple me really fast, and I wanted to read more. And especially about the repercussions of the events that developed right at the start of the book, what the repercussions would be, that was the part that really got me going. And then we got stuck mostly with Windle Spoons, which was a part of the plot that I wasn't that interested in, and we got stuck with him for a very long time. I mean, very long within this book, because this book has, 300 pages, so very long could be 50 to 75 pages, give or take. But it's still quite a long stretch to stay with the same character. And the problem was, I wasn't really invested in Windle Spoons. I didn't care much about the consequences of what was happening with him, and I was much more interested in Bildor. I mean, there were still some funny parts with Windle Spoons, but again, everything compared with Bildor was just much more interesting. Luckily, from what I would say halfway point, the two plotlines start intertwining more, not necessarily because the characters meet each other, just we changed the point of view more often, and because of that it got more engaging and I was able to keep my interest in flowing and keep reading it faster. And of course the ending of this book was just marvelous. I was able to understand why people love this series so much. It really struck a chord in my heart, that ending, and yeah, I really loved it. So overall, I think for the plot, I'm gonna give a 4 out of 5. Now let's talk about characters. As I mentioned, Bildor, Windle Spoons, those are our main protagonists, and they are great characters. I think Terry Pratchett was really smart because these two characters show two very different perspectives of what the same problem is causing. This way we get to understand why the problem was caused and what happens when that problem rises and causes consequences to everyone else in the world. We understand how Bildor feels, but at the same time we can understand perfectly well why Windle Spoon feels the way he feels. We can be in his shoes. Although I don't think anyone can actually be in Windle Spoon's shoes because his situation was very particular. And of course with Terry Pratchett we have a wide range of side characters that seem to be completely irrelevant until he suddenly drops details that connect back into the main plot. And all of them seem so distinct and so interesting that you can't help but love everyone, even if they just show up for a couple pages. So for characters, of course I'm going to give a 5 out of 5. What about world building? That was a problem in the first book. I feel like it was quite a big jump into the Discworld. However, I feel like because I read Mort, this time for Reaper Man, getting into the Discworld was much easier. I knew already a lot of what was happening in the world. I knew the places, some of the people, and so I was already familiar with the world before the plot started happening. And I loved it so much. I feel like things in this world can be so absurd, but make so much sense at the same time. Like, for example, and this might be a spoiler, but however, I will try to avoid any kind of spoilers for the Reaper Man. But then again, it's just a detail, doesn't really impact on the major plot. But I'll let you decide that, you can skip to this timestamp. But basically, the oldest living organism is a tree. And that tree is the oldest because it was able to change its genetic mechanisms to show their age in front of their bark, so that men didn't have to cut and count the number of rings they have. It makes absolutely no sense in our world, but it's the absurdism that makes it so funny. Of course, I loved it even more now that I was more used to the Discworld, so for me this category deserves a 5 out of 5 and probably will stay like this for the entirety of the series. Writing style is our second last category to go through, and what can I say about it? Terry Pratchett's writing style is unique. I don't think I've ever read anything like it, or the closest I've gotten to was maybe Douglas Adams with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's a writing that is so absurd, but wonderful at the same time. I laughed so many times, chuckled while on the train reading this book, even at work, and it's a fast-paced book, so something is always happening. And the writing is so smart, but witty at the same time. It feels like Terry Pratchett wants to teach you something, but of course if you were just taught, you wouldn't like it. So he finds ways to make it funny, but for you to also learn. I'm going to read a passage from the book that spoke a lot to me. This doesn't involve any spoilers at all. It's almost completely irrelevant to the book. But in my perspective as a biologist, I feel like it sends a very good message while at the same time being quite funny, and it goes along like this. Most species do their own evolving, making it up as they go along, which is the way nature intended. And this is very natural and organic and in tune with mysterious cycles of the cosmos, which believes that there is nothing like millions of years of really frustrating trial and error to give a species moral fiber, and in some cases, backbone. This might just sound stupid, or maybe you don't get the joke because you're not a biologist, but for the ones that did, it's brilliant and it's funny. So of course, writing style is a 5 out of 5 for me as well, as if you couldn't guess it. And our final category is enjoyment. Reading this book is easy, there is always something happening and the pace is quite fast, so you can read it quite fast as well. Did I feel that keenness to read this book all the time? Not really. It started like that, then it tapered off as I spent more and more time with Windle Spoons, and it picked back up once the plot lines between Windle Spoons and Doors started intertwining more. I'm not entirely sure why Windle Spoons slowed me down this much. I don't know if it was because the plot was slower or if the character itself wasn't as attractive to me. But yeah, something about it didn't make me roll on like a snowball to reading this book. So because of that, there was that hiccup between 10 and 30% of the book, I'd say. And because of that, my enjoyment was a 4 out of 5, but still quite close to a 5. And finishing our 5 categories, we have our final results. If I put the categories all up together with the categories for the first book, Mort, you see that they rate the exact same for me. I mean, not in terms of categories, but in terms of final score. I think Mort and Reaper are equally good books. They differ in certain parts, but they have strengths that only Terry Pratchett can give, of course, but they improve and they become different in some ways. I think Mort being the first book in the series, it has to do a lot of heavy lifting and it can't rely on previous readings like Reaper did when I knew already much from Discworld thanks to Mort, and therefore world building was easier to be followed up. I feel like between Reaper and Mort, Reaper was probably higher up compared to Mort, but still both really good books. And in the end, when I rated these 2 books on Goodreads, I give them both 5 stars out of 5, because on Goodreads you can only give whole stars, so for me these 2 books are 5 stars. And of course I'm still very keen to keep reading this series. There are a couple more books. I think the next one is Hogfather, which I have, so I might pick it up soon. And of course I hope the next book is as good as this one, if not better. So what do you think? Are you curious to read Reaper or to read the Death series at all? Or should I read other Discworld series? What do you think? Let me know down below in the comments, and if you're new, welcome. Subscribe, like the content, and let me know what you would like to see next. And I guess I'll be seeing you soon, right? Adeus!